Week 25 Overview. Andrew Johnson versus Radical Reconstruction. Last week, we left off our study of American history with the closing days of the Civil War and the assassination of President Lincoln. As you can imagine, things looked very bleak to most Americans during those days. The southern states had been the primary battleground for the last 2 years of the war, and the stiff resistance of its leaders to the north had led to utter devastation of its farmlands and principal cities. Civilians and soldiers who survived the war were starving. Bitterness and anger towards both Northerners and blacks was common, but not universal, among whites in the defeated South. Victorious Northerners had little to crow over. They were uncertain as to how to put away the enmity of the past 4 years and rebuild the nation. Many despaired as to whether it could even be done. After Lincoln's assassination in April, a Southern man, Andrew Johnson, became president. Soon thereafter, Congress adjourned without having put any laws into effect regarding the rebuilding of the nation. President Lincoln had sketched a plan for the readmission of Southern states, but left many questions unanswered. As Congress discussed the weaknesses of Lincoln's plan, some debated whether the President or Congress should take leadership in determining policies for Reconstruction. Lincoln's sudden death silenced that great man forever on the topic of how the nation should be reunited, and left lingering questions about the proper leader for the necessary work ahead. President Johnson had ideas that were very like Lincoln's, but his temperament was less flexible, humble, and magnanimous than his predecessors had been. Johnson was a Southerner and a slaveholder who interpreted the Constitution strictly, distrusted wealthy Southern leaders, and showed no interest in upholding the rights of black freedmen. This mix of beliefs and prejudices created difficult situations for both the new president and Congress when Congress came back into session late in 1865. The Reconstruction era is confusing because there were so many strong and urgent yet conflicting priorities for individuals, leaders, and government. It seems that it would have been impossible for all the strong desires of all participants to be well satisfied. As with all crisis situations, the best and the worst aspects of people were brought to light by the intense heat of the events during this era. This week we'll study the course of the initial and radical phases of Reconstruction, which occurred during the administration of President Johnson. Next week, we'll finish with this era as we study the administration of Ulysses S. Grant. We're coming up on the end of this unit. Does your family have any plans for a unit celebration? These celebrations are the perfect time for a dad to say, "Well done, good and faithful family." If your wife hasn't already made plans to celebrate, this might be your chance to show some initiative by doing something special. With enough kids and a little imagination, you might stage your own small reenactment of the Civil War one Saturday morning. Or you could all dress up in blue or gray and watch a good Civil War movie together. Whatever you think might best suit your family, the end of each unit provides an excellent opportunity for you as a father to bless your wife and make a memory with your children. Let's go back to Andrew Johnson. Johnson was born in North Carolina and raised on the Tennessee frontier. He was a tailor by trade whose wife homeschooled him. He was a serious man with a prickly pride, but he rose to serve in Congress, then as governor and as senator. Like his political hero, Andrew Johnson considered himself the champion of the common man. The common white man, that is. He distrusted the rich and despised the slaves. Johnson was for the Union and slavery, which almost got him killed in his home state of Tennessee, which had seceded. Johnson was the only senator from the South who refused to secede with his state. Once the Union armies conquered Tennessee, Lincoln appointed Johnson military governor of that area. Lincoln chose him as his vice president when he ran for re-election in 1864. Lincoln's plan for Reconstruction was not clear when he was assassinated. Overall, he wanted reconciliation without retaliation. He insisted on protecting the freed slaves and their friends in the South, but he had no desire to punish those who submitted to the Union. Lincoln got part of this agenda started with the Freedmen's Bureau Bill, which created an agency to provide assistance to the freed slaves. This was part of the War Department, which was consistent with the way Lincoln used his power as commander-in-chief to emancipate the slaves. The Freedmen's Bureau started 4,000 schools and 100 hospitals for former slaves. After the war, it took on the role of a military court for legal issues involving African Americans. The Bureau's efforts to be fair to the freedmen soon aroused the ire of their old masters. After Lincoln was assassinated, Andrew Johnson took the helm. Johnson hated traitors, as he called the Confederate leaders. He thought the Southern aristocracy had misled the common people of the South. He wanted to punish the generals, and the politicians, but he believed in a full restoration of rights for the Southern men who had served in the Confederate Army. Congress was out of session when Lincoln was shot, so Johnson started implementing his plan for Reconstruction in their absence. 6 weeks after the assassination, he granted a general amnesty to Southern soldiers who were willing to sign an oath of loyalty to the Union. He appointed provisional governors and ordered them to start reorganizing the state governments. He left it up to each state to decide whether or not freed slaves would get to vote. Unfortunately, but not unpredictably, the new state governments formed under Johnson's plan started passing laws called black codes that perpetuated the mistreatment of freed slaves. In various Southern states, the following laws applied. A black person under the age of 18 was forced to work as an apprentice to a white man. If a black person left his employer, he could be arrested and fined, or forced to work without wages. A black person was not allowed to work as a skilled tradesman without a license. A freed slave could not own a weapon. It was against the law for a black person to purchase or rent farmland. Laws like these meant that freedmen found it extremely difficult to meet even the simplest daily needs. The freed slaves were also threatened by violence. The Ku Klux Klan and other secret organizations emerged to threaten blacks and their supporters in the South. None of this sat well with the Republicans, who came back to Congress that winter. They refused to admit the newly elected congressman from the South. The radical Republicans in Congress wanted to punish the slave-owning South, not just their political and military leaders. For the next year, Congress passed Reconstruction bills. Johnson vetoed them, and Congress overrode his veto. For example, the Civil Rights Act of 1866 declared that the freed slaves were citizens of the United States, gave them the same economic and legal rights as white citizens, and provided enforcement power to make sure the new law was actually carried out. Johnson vetoed it, as government students learned last week, but Congress overrode it. The problem with this act was that when Congress declared the freedmen to be citizens, it was doing exactly what the Supreme Court said it couldn't do in Dred Scott v. Sanford. That's one reason Congress adopted the 14th Amendment later that year, which directly and specifically overturned Dred Scott by expressly making all freed slaves citizens of the United States and of the state in which they reside. The first section goes on to guarantee all the privileges and immunities of citizens of the United States, which are the rights we discussed in government last week in the Civil Rights Act of 1866. Just to make sure that slaves would really be protected, Congress copied language from the Fifth Amendment that prohibited any state from depriving any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, a phrase so broad that constitutional lawyers can spend a lifetime on it. Before the midterm elections of 1866, Johnson campaigned across the northern states to present his views to the people. It didn't help. The radical Republicans won a clear majority of seats in Congress. The conflict between Congress and the president escalated into impeachment. The House of Representatives voted 126 to 47 to impeach Johnson. The 11 articles of impeachment against him accused him of breaking specific laws and of conspiring against Congress and the Constitution. Johnson's trial by the Senate was a squeaker. It takes 2/3 of the Senate to convict a president. He was acquitted by a single vote. Meanwhile, back in the South, power shifted from the former slaveholders to their enemies. A coalition of freedmen, Northerners, and Southern Republicans took control of the new governments. Many Union soldiers decided to stay down south, and other Northerners took advantage of the new opportunities. These outsiders were known as carpetbaggers because Southerners claimed they were so poor they could fit everything they owned into the cheap suitcases they carried. The Southern whites who became Republicans were called scalawags. Before the Civil War, that term applied to worthless cows, all of the mean, lean, mangy, hidebound, skinny, worthless cattle in any drove. But now Southerners used it for the so-called white trash who sided with the blacks and Yankees. In Washington, President Johnson and Congress both wanted vengeance against their enemies. Johnson hated traitors, while the radical Republicans hated every aspect of slavery. Revenge is a dangerous motive that seldom bears good fruit. James 1:20 tells us, "The anger of man does not achieve the righteousness of God." The task of really reconstructing the South would have been well nigh impossible for the most gifted of presidents. The one man who might have brought it about was shot just 5 days into his second term. Neither Andrew Johnson nor the Congress had what it took to make up what the nation lost with Lincoln.